Good evening and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French. We're going to wrap up another action-packed week with yet another busy news day. Tonight, we speak with the head of the Postal Union about the cuts made by the Postmaster General that are delaying service and even threaten to impact the coming election. Then, Election Day, hey, it's only 7 weeks away. We have got the latest numbers for you. Plus, we're going to tell you about some Republican senators who are breaking ranks when it comes to standing with this president. We'll also take a look at one of the most important segments of this vote, that the Hispanic electorate, and why Democrats are concerned that Joe Biden, he's losing traction with Latino voters. Plus, the very latest when it comes to COVID outbreak, including how political appointees are meddling with the CDC. But we begin tonight with a backlash from the comments made just this week from General William Barr, Attorney General. A quick look at today's papers gives you an idea of how they're being received. An editorial in the Times written by a former Solicitor General of the United States with the headline, "This is how bad it's gotten at the Justice Department." It details how the president is using the DOJ for his own political benefit, and Barr, he's all in. Then there's this opinion piece in the Washington Post. The headline, "We're all trapped in William Barr's paranoid fantasy world." The piece, it shows how Barr, concerned that the left, not the president, is the greatest threat to our democracy. Then there's this article in Vox, "The Stunning Hypocrisy of Bill Barr." Now, I could go on all day, but I think you get the picture here. In the past week, the Attorney General has made a series of frankly jaw-dropping statements, especially concerning the coming from the top law enforcement officer of our country. So let's start with Barr speaking at an event sponsored by Hillsdale College this week.
Putting a national lockdown, stay-at-home orders is like house arrest. It's other than slavery, which was a different kind of restraint, this is the greatest intrusion on civil liberties in American history.
Slavery. Then, when asked about his involvement in several politically charged cases involving the president and those close to him, Barr, he decided to attack line prosecutors in his own Justice Department.
Name one successful organization or institution where the lowest level employees' decisions are deemed sacrosanct. They aren't. There aren't any. Letting the most junior members set the agenda might be a good philosophy for a Montessori preschool, but it is no way to run a federal agency.
Imagine how that's going over with morale over at DOJ. Now, the day before the Hillsdale speech, Barr, he held a conference call with federal prosecutors across this country. He reportedly told them to aggressively charge protesters that he, keyword, he deems violent, including prosecuting them for sedition. Sedition means plotting to overthrow the government. Now, think about that for a minute. The Attorney General of the United States saying that protesters, again, our First Amendment right here, could be charged with treason. Democrats so concerned about Barr, they've asked the DOJ's Inspector General to open an investigation into Barr's conduct. They sent a letter to the IG, and now I'm going to quote a portion of it for you. Attorney General Barr has signaled repeatedly that he is likely to allow DOJ to take prosecutorial actions, make public disclosures, and even issue reports before the presidential election in November. Such actions clearly appear intended to benefit President Trump politically. All right, let's bring in our first guest here. She penned a piece for Slate called "How William Barr Misunderstands America's Founding Fathers." Dahlia Lithwick, she joins us. She's also a host of the podcast Amicus. You know, when I was looking forward to talking to you, this is before Hillsdale, and seemingly by the hour, Dahlia, and I think we're so inured to the craziness of the daily news cycle. Can you help with the scope of history? What the Attorney General is supposed to do as our top law enforcement officer, particularly with the Department of Justice, and how perverted what we're dealing right now is versus the norm?
I'm glad you asked for the big picture, because I think you're right. We're in a blender right now, and so it's hard to clock everything that's going on. But I think maybe I would start with Watergate and start by saying that after Watergate, we saw attorneys general who were indicted, right? We knew after Watergate that the attorney general could not act as the president's personal attorney, do the kinds of things that Michael Cohen was doing for Donald Trump at the Trump organization. And after Watergate, a whole bunch of procedures, protocols, norms were put into effect at the Justice Department, all of which were intended to ensure that it would never again happen that the Attorney General or the behemoth, the machine that is the Justice Department, could be twisted up to work for the president's behest. And so I think that the question is exactly the right question, which is, what do you do when, despite all of those reforms, we now have an Attorney General who really seems to believe that his job is to corroborate the president's narratives and to corroborate the president's electoral fortunes.
And I know you certainly know, I know a whole bunch of former federal prosecutors, including a few current ones. I don't know any of their politics. Everybody obviously brings their own baggage to the table, but they go to such lengths to tell me that it was the most unseemly thing to do to bring your political baggage to your job as a federal prosecutor, and they really meant it. And for those people who have reasons to, have questions about some of the bedrock organizations in this country or institutions, federal prosecutors, they're not in it for the buck. And the idea that the AG referred to them as basically a class of Montessori school kids that are in need of guidance, just remind the folks who Jean Carroll is, because to me, I thought the hypocrisy was unbelievable when he said that they're trying to drive agendas, these prosecutors, and I, as the all-knowing one, I'm going to have to get involved here to make sure that they don't do anything unbecoming. He is so basically the president's personal attorney. Jean Carroll, the example I'd love you to discuss, that for him to say that's beyond hypocrisy.
Yeah, I mean, E. Jean Carroll is only the latest manifestation. She had claimed in a book and in an article over a year ago that she had been raped in the Bergdorf Goodman changing room by Donald Trump in the 90s because she cannot bring an action because it happened so long ago. When Donald Trump, responding to that allegation, said, "Oh, I didn't know her. I never even met her. There are photographs of them together. She's not my type," was his response. So E. Jean Carroll essentially brought a defamation suit in New York, saying, as she's entitled to do, that Donald Trump imperiled her career and her reputation by saying that she lied. This case was proceeding along in the New York State courts. Donald Trump had lost at every turn. He was trying to block discovery. He was trying to block any attempts to probe this, and judge after judge ruled against him. It was just about time for him to begin to comply with discovery. And suddenly, out of the blue, Bill Barr's Justice Department swooped in and removed the case to federal court, said, this is no longer E. Jean Carroll against Donald Trump. It is now E. Jean Carroll against the United States. And that Donald Trump was acting in his capacity as president when he said she wasn't his type and wasn't attractive. And therefore, because he was acting under his employment description, he is immune from suit. And it's just another in a long history of the Michael Flynn, the Roger Stone, all the attempts that the president has made to use the Justice Department to protect his friends. But I think E. Jean Carroll is just another example of Bill Barr being willing to go places no attorney general has ever gone, making claims about what Donald Trump's scope of his employment is, and making claims as well about if the president does it, it's never unlawful.
Dahlia, I've asked a lot of people, including people who worked with Bill Barr going back to the Bush 41 years, as to why. Why would he do this? But I've given up on that. And instead, he condemned the idea of science or medicine, even though there is no, by the way, quarantine order, it's being discussed, that he is the imprimatur of what is right or wrong in dealing with the pandemic. But the idea that he would amass military and talk about a heat ray and condition people as being seditionist if they wanted to protest. I said to somebody, imagine if King was going to have a march on Washington today. What if Susan B. Anthony was pushing to have equal rights for women when it came to voting or whatever else? Would Barr be the basic decider as to who gets to protest, who doesn't, who gets to have a voice, and who gets to employ the military to put it down? Without being, I think, extreme here, that's really the window that he views not only his power, but the executive overreach that he's willing to grant this president. And that's really, I think, the stakes that we're talking about, especially if you think what 4 more years of this could look like. So
I do still ask people why and how Barr has changed, because I think that, we have to remember he was a lifer at the Justice Department. He's served in other administrations, arguably has made some calls that I might disagree with, but certainly as somebody who I think understood the prerogatives and the priorities of the Justice Department. And I guess what I want to really focus in on is not just, as you're saying, that he's going after the right to peaceably assemble, protected in the First Amendment. He's going after the right to speak, protected in the First Amendment. He's making claims about sedition. He's making claims about treason. That's all radical, but that he's turning it against his fellow Americans. He's essentially saying that if you go to a protest in Portland, if you amass at Lafayette Square to protest, then you are somehow a danger, a threat to America. And that's really what is scary, because I think the line between that and the claims that Donald Trump is making and that Bill Barr is making, that this entire election will be stolen and fraudulent because of what Americans are doing to other Americans, that's a way of destabilizing voter confidence, not just in other Americans, in ourselves, but in the election itself. And that seems to be the long game, and I find that frankly terrifying.
And I shouldn't have to, but just with a little basic civics, the idea that he unilaterally is deciding we don't have separation of powers in this country, that he is completely misrepresenting the very idea of the country, which was people coming here for freedom of religion, and we didn't want to have, in effect, a monarchy, that there isn't a backstop to that. And I'm sorry, but Republicans on the Hill, they need to start growing a spine here, especially when the DNI doesn't even want to give them briefings in person. But the Department of Justice, or more specifically, the AG, I just heard testimony from the FBI director who said unequivocally, Russia is the biggest threat to interference in our election. Yet I hear from Barr saying, well, no, it's the Chinese, based off of no intel. And with all the other things that you've mentioned to this point, it's, as you say, I think we all make the risk of just letting this get washed up in a crazy news cycle here, because right before our eyes, the basic structure of what we've all gotten used to, and what I would wrongly thought, Dahlia, there were so many girders where no person or no AG could ever kind of go around them completely. It's happening in real time.
One of the things that Christopher Wray testified to the FBI director is that Russian interventions in the election are not, they're not hacking into the grid, they're not hacking into machines, they are simply flooding the zone with misinformation. 2 types. One claims about Joe Biden being mentally unfit, being senile. That's being flooded into our sort of ecosystem, informational ecosystem. And the other, it goes right back to Bill Barr, this claim, perfectly unfounded, not true, that voting by mail is inherently going to lead to fraudulent results. For them to continue to say this election is going to be rigged, it's going to be hacked, it's going to be stolen, all that does is make people feel what you are describing, which is powerless and numb. And it gives them the sense that they have no agency, they cannot correct or fix this. And I think that really is kind of the Putin playbook. Flood the zone with misinformation so you don't trust anyone anymore. Our job is to continue, I think, this drumbeat of, look, you do have agency, you do have power, you have the ability to discern what is true and what is false. And if we find ourselves in this very unfortunate moment where the media is being flooded by Russian disinformation, and when the president and the attorney general are parroting those messages, I think it really redoubles our need to find out for ourselves, to vote for ourselves, to believe in democracy, to say, I'm going to have a plan and figure out how to vote, and nobody is going to tell me that my mailman is stealing my ballot and selling it to the bad guys. That's not true.
Dahlia Lithwick, great conversation. I appreciate the time tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone, another element to this, voting and how we're going to vote. Well, the head of the Postal Union will join us next. He is livid with his new boss, the postmaster, and the cuts at the Postal Service, slashing service just when people need their mail most.